appreciate the opportunity to be here. And as Nicole said, I'm Steve Smith. I'm National Program Leader for Animal Production Systems with NIFA. Been with the agency about 11 years, and the last 10 of those have I've been connected with the organic programs, both OREI and Organic Transitions, and I've been very appreciative of that. I currently co-lead those with my colleague Matt Guaju, and he is currently in the Cameroon, so he's not with us today, but I'm happy to be here myself. Now, you've asked me to talk about organic dairy research needs, and maybe I'll take a little different spin than you have anticipated, or maybe not. But I think I really need to open it up with a question, which is really I've skipped a slide here. Started with the question, so how does NIFA decide what those needs are? Because we write up our RFAs and we put priorities in there. Okay, where do those come from? And that's where I'm going to kind of talk through how we decide, because most of it is by listening to our stakeholders. We have hosted and will continue to host formal listening sessions. We will engage commodity groups, and most commonly they engage us. They come and visit and will share their thoughts on what they think priorities are, and that can be OFRF or other entities that are actually represented in this meeting. So I'm actually looking forward to hearing from you. But they could also include meetings like this that engages a number of people. Informal communications that might occur, whether they be at scientific meetings or over the phone when stakeholders call. All of those impact what we do. We also, with the peer review process for OREI and Organic Transitions, we have our peer review panelists that are in, and a lot of times they're very insightful because they will have just read the responses, if you will, to our RFAs, our requests for applications. And they will have read a number of those applications. They will read them in light of the RFA as it was published. And oftentimes they're very insightful in saying, okay, here are the hits and here are the misses. Here's what, how the community reacted to what you said in that document. And it also gives them the opportunity to point out gaps as they see them. And again, that's valuable input that we use to help decide what our priorities are. The applicants themselves give us a lot of insight, because if you think about the process, we're opening the door, but in a perhaps not terribly explicit way, or certainly not a way that we intend to prescribe the applications that we get. And oftentimes the applicants themselves are the ones that bring us additional ideas that ultimately come to be part of what we consider important pieces of of needed research or areas where we need further investigation. So what are we looking for? Well, the best way to answer that is we're looking for problems and barriers. We're looking for persistent, challenging issues that are needing research-based solutions. And those can come to us from any number of places, but we try to notice them when we see them. And so I'm going to offer some examples and hopefully broad enough to give you a feel for what we consider high priority research needs. So first example, we need research in support of advanced on-farm dairy research that emphasizes innovation for organic dairy farms. Okay, and by that we mean, this is on-farm, pre-harvest type research in production, marketing, socioeconomic considerations, the efficiency of production, the productivity itself, economic returns. Because if you look at sustainability, what are the big principles there? There's the economic, the environmental, and the societal facets of sustainability. We need to cover those. We need to research the country and be able to document the contribution of organic dairies to the producers themselves, the processors, the local communities. So that was pre-harvest. Okay, but what about post-harvest? We need research to improve our allowable post-harvest handling, processing, and food safety practices, which I think is near and dear to the hearts of Martin and his colleagues. And I appreciate their efforts very much. We need to find ways to reduce contamination and increase shelf life, quality, and other economically important characteristics of the milk and other dairy products that we're producing. We need research in systems-based dairy production, health, and pest management practices. We need to improve dairy productivity, health, and welfare, and certainly enhance the economic viability of the dairy enterprise. And I want to draw particular attention here because I think all the facets of the dairy enterprise are important. I think one of our greatest vulnerabilities, though, is in animal health. We just have so few tools to work with. And I think if anybody is going to criticize us from the outside looking in, that's a window that they can come through. There's an open door for them to point their finger, and I think that's one that I think is a high priority for us to address. So I don't know. I wouldn't say that I say that to the exclusion of other topics because they're also important. But if you ask, I'm an animal scientist, and if you ask me what I think is one of our greatest vulnerabilities, that's certainly one of them. Okay, a persistent problem that needs a research-based solution. Okay, but what about the animals themselves? And these things all interrelate. So we need to select dairy breeds and genotypes adapted to organic systems. And related to the animal health question, if we can find some that are developed ones that are pest, parasite, and disease resistant, think of what that might do to our industry. We need research into the health and performance of those cows under organic pasture and feed regimens. Love to have breeds that are particularly resilient to heat and the fluctuations in forage quality and other stresses related to climate change. Again, fairly broad topics, but we need some solutions. But it's not just production and processing. We have an open door for research into the marketing and policy and other socioeconomic barriers to the expansion of organic agriculture. We think that is important. But it's not just research, because as I've been known to say, if we have the greatest breakthrough known to man, but we don't communicate it, has it really had an impact? And I would say the answer to that is no. So in addition to the research needs, we need to develop the educational tools for the cooperative extension personnel and other professionals who advise the dairy producers on organic practices, so we can take those technologies to the farm and have them implemented. And then within within OREI, I'd be remiss if we didn't at least give a nod to investment in education, developing that next generation undergraduate and graduate curricula for organic agriculture, instructional delivery, and particularly experiential learning, including student farmer engagement. I think that is very valuable to us, and the door is open for that in OREI. So with this brief discussion, you've probably noticed something, and that is, our definition of organic dairy research needs, or at least my personal definition, and I think Matt would agree, it's very broad. And it's deliberately very broad. It's intentionally. We specifically wrote, our list of organic dairy research needs and that of and other facets of organic agriculture. But we wrote them quite broad because we don't want to exclude any promising ideas. So, if Martin were to come up with something that was a little outside the main focus of any one of these bullet points, that's okay, because I want those truly novel ideas, and in many cases the really novel ones go beyond what we will logically anticipate and could put on a list. So this is our acknowledgement that our stakeholders collectively know more than we do, And I definitely want to leave that door open so that they can come to us with their great ideas that need, research investment and, the problems they need to solve through investment in dairy research. So with that, I realize it's been a little bit brief, but I want to transition now and let you tell me. Here's my opportunity to learn from you on regarding what you think are the most important, or even if it's not most important, areas that you think we need to see investment in terms of organic dairy research. So what do you think?
So just as a reminder, you can enter any questions for Steve in the chat box, or request that we unmute you so that you can ask in person. But this is a really great opportunity for not just those of us in academia, but all of the stakeholders who are here this morning to get your sort of what's important for future research in the organic dairy industry. How can we improve the types of research that's done? And here's your opportunity to talk to the man who's who's in charge.
And another way of asking it is, if you could insert anything into the request for applications, so the upcoming ORAI request for applications, what would it be?
So we have a question from Ron Indivina from Wegmans. What are you doing for customers, and how are you telling the story of how good dairy is for them? So is there a role in the research for that?
Well, certainly. Well, I guess, first just take a step back, and we are, just to clarify, though I suspect you know this, NIFA is a granting agency. We invest in research, education, and extension. So when you step over into, well, for lack of a better term, advocacy or promotion, that gets out of our legal charge. The NIFA was, the Organic Agriculture Research and Extension Initiative, and NIFA itself was created by legislation through Congress, and it's fairly clear. It fairly clearly defines what we can and cannot do, and we are not a marketing board, so we are somewhat limited in that. But I would draw your attention to our opportunity to invest in research that would address barriers and policy and some of those issues that come close to, but isn't exactly what you've asked about. So we can make investments that would lead to what you have requested, but then it would have to pass over to someone else, whether that's Ag Marketing Service or others that or even some of the organizations represented in this meeting, to actually carry it forward into the actual marketing and promotion of the products.
So it sounds like this might go kind of hand in hand also with the education portion that you were talking about, and educating consumers with what these products are all about, and how we can benefit as consumers from these dairy products.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So Guy Joderski would like to ask a question. So I'm going to go ahead and, or Rachel will let him.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Steve, you mentioned a vulnerability of a lack of tools, and I'd like you to give a couple examples of that, and I may have a follow-up question.
Oh, sure. You're talking specifically about animal health?
I would be, because as a veterinarian working with organic dairy farmers, that's my main interest.
Well, I guess I'll share an anecdote, and maybe you could help me actually formulate the best right answer. So, hypothetically, you're on the farm. You have a cow come down with mastitis. What do you do? Well, yeah, the question that was posed to me, or the scenario that was posed to me, they said, do you really believe that that cow is going to get treated? I said, well, you know, the regs state that she will be in you know, with an approved product, I'm sure would be the first choice. And if that's not appropriate, you know, then it proceeds on. But then they said, well, if you go beyond, you know, these approved choices to something that might be more effective, might actually, you know, depending on the severity of the thing, okay, she's removed from the herd. How likely is that cow will you know, that cow will actually get the treatment that she needs? And of course, I was, you know, dealing with the devil's advocate in that conversation, but it did point out actually something that I have observed at times, you know, when dealing with organic livestock producers, where they will be a little resistant to aggressively treating their animals if it meant jeopardizing, you know, their certification of, you know, the certification of that animal. Now, I've also dealt with others who have had redundant herds, you know, one with conventional, one a conventional system, the other an organic system, and if in that scenario, they just shift the treated cow, or they shift the cow that needs to be treated to the conventional herd and move on. So there's ways around it, and they certainly are treatments, but how effective, you know, can they be? Are they, you know, even something as simple as you know, external parasites, and down a project that we funded in North Carolina dealing with the different fly populations that were causing, you know, issues, but, you know, face flies, for instance. Okay, how do you deal with that? Well, you know, they were coming up with some pretty novel techniques to do that, but in the absence of those, or prior to those, what do you do? And it just sort of leaves us open to accusations, whether, you know, true or false, but it does leave us open to external criticism unless we're in a very strong position to refute them. So I guess that's what has led me to believe that that's an opportunity for additional research in organic dairy production. So your thoughts on that? I'd love to hear your comments, because you actually spend your time, you know, on farm doing this, where I'm watching it from a distance.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the first example that you started off with was, you know, in not a direct way saying it, but I think it was antibiotics was the threshold you were talking about, and that's the one where I think there's definitely a question there at times whether people, you know, hold off using antibiotics. You know, in the end, we really try to prevent things. And of course, there's always a need for some treatments. And we have a group of synthetic compounds that are allowed. And there's a lot of natural compounds, Latin botanical substances that have a historical background, but they're not FDA approved. So we run into this issue of it's not peer reviewed, it's not FDA, it doesn't have the NADA number, new animal drug application number, it hasn't gone through the multi-million-dollar studies.
Right. And
so that's kind of a roadblock that we hit a lot with treatment.
Right.
You know, but I would say, you know, like you said, the fly study, that's, you know, that I would guess some of that was a systems-based solution rather than just something we're going to spray on the animal to repel the flies. You know, we use the fly predators for face flies, the little parasitic wasps, you know. And so the solutions are more complex. They're more upstream. It's not what typical veterinary science is used to looking at. And so I think sometimes it's really a communication issue of delving into this at a little deeper level.
Very good point. Thank you.
May I add something here?
Please do, Erica.
So Kathy mentioned in the chat, she's a organic dairy farmer, that most of the samples they send for identification are culture negative. And that's exactly what I did on my PhD, looking at the effectiveness of antibiotic treatment in gram-negative and culture-negative cases. So I agree that we need to be trying to make, in a perfect scenario in my head, if you have a gram-positive case, that should be mandated to be treated with antibiotics. if you have a gram negative or a no growth. That's where we want to try to improve research to select the cows that have good immune response against gram negative and no growth, because the current drugs we have don't really work well against these. But we do have a lot of data showing that things like streptococcus responds well to treatment. And I don't think it's I think it would be a welfare issue to withhold antibiotic treatment from a streptococcus thing. So what are your thoughts on that, everyone?
You may not have caught it, but she opened that up to the audience, and so we would welcome your thoughts and comments on that.
I think
This is my maybe summarizes a little bit. I mean, I think the need of a sort of a rational decision tree that could be used by veterinarians and industry as it comes, you know, mastitis probably being the primary one, saying, okay, here's what happens, at which stage do you go to what treatment? And obviously there's a strong emphasis to stay within the approved treatments, and then also use this to define gaps in terms of approved drugs for use in or approved treatments for use by the organic industry, by organic dairy farms. I think that would, to me, seems to be the research need. I think there's probably a lot of information out there, but it's easier for some people to make these decisions than others. So to me, that would be sort of where I see the need and where I see this going. And I think that's what you said, Erica, could be incorporated into that. I think if it's XYZ organism, XYZ disease characteristics at some point, you know, you need to move on. You may have to move to something that is not approved for organic. But I think defining that line is not going to be trivial, but I think it's an important topic.
I agree.
Okay, so Andrew Smith had a comment interested in nutrient quality of dairy products, and maybe beef from dairy steers from organic production, grazing, different breeds, et cetera, and ultimately how it impacts human health.
Okay.
So that kind of nutritional research, how much of that does NIFA fund?
Well, depending on depending on how you spin it, and I don't really like the word spin, but we actually discourage applications whose sole objective is to compare conventional to organic products, because you know that's a slippery slope that oftentimes doesn't do a great deal to benefit either side. So that we're looking more at the science behind, you know, the underscoring or undergirding organic production, and trying to stress that rather than spending a lot of the grant dollars on the, you know, just the comparative side of that. Now, having said that, if you start looking at nutrient content of, you know, pick any product, but you know, you have developed an enhanced milk product using organic standards, and discover, you know, nutrients and that might have beneficial health effects. Certainly research to support the claim that, and of course you have to be a little careful when you start talking about a claim, because that gets the FDA involved, and those get to be very, very costly. But if you wanted to investigate the benefits of those in a diet, you know, that's something that would be, you know, that would be within the realm of consideration. But if you're looking at just a head-to-head organic versus conventional, we're probably not going to be terribly excited about that.
Andrew, was that sort of, does that answer your question? Is that the direction you were thinking, or was there more to that thought?
No, that's all. I didn't think I heard anything about that in the, and I don't know if it, I think there's probably other parts of NIFA that address some of the nutritional, food
Oh,
product,
yes.
nutrition of food products. But I do, I think there's things like, benefits of breeding or grazing and breeds, and what's really hard is ultimately getting it to human health. But I think it would strengthen the industry to be able to very clearly through science-based data show the health benefits. Because I think sometimes, whether it's organic or not, the dairy industry is getting attacked. The dairy may not be a healthy product.
Though I think we're seeing a turn in a turn in that regard, and a lot more data recently about the health benefits. So and then whether it be conventional or organic, I'm encouraged by that. But now we within NIFA do have an entire institute for food IFSN, so food safety and nutrition, and those deal with the human facets of nutrition. And there is a program one of the foundational programs that would be open to the human side of the human benefits of nutrients that would come through these organic products. So that's something you could possibly explore.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have questions for Steve or comments about, thoughts on what kind of research is needed in organic right now, what you'd like to see happen, what questions you have?
I guess maybe ask a bigger picture question. How open would this program be to more, let's call it sort of modeling based approaches, to really sort of look at modeling out the complete system, whether it's, organic, dairy, other animal-based systems, versus more sort of, going to call it experimental, where you do intervention trials. What's the combination? Is there a strong feeling about one way or the other, or it's just whatever is the best research? It doesn't matter what approaches it uses.
Right, and I'm actually glad you asked that question, because it's one that really hadn't occurred to me to mention with this particular group, because I don't recall ever getting a modeling based application in OREI. And yet they would be entirely welcome as long as it followed the guidelines of the RFA and addressed the priorities in the RFA. And I think maybe that's a piece that's missing. That may even constitute a gap, because I know in some of my other programs that like my nutrition growth and lactation program, it's not specifically organic. It does not exclude organic. It's actually a language in there, encouraging applications from the organic community. But we do see a fair amount of modeling there, and it's kind of well accepted in that program. And I don't see there's any reason that it should not be just as well accepted in OREI. We just haven't been presented one. And you might actually, drive a paradigm shift among the panelists, because the first year they see it, they might even scratch their head and wonder, gosh, can we do this? And the answer is yes, you can. So you might be an icebreaker there.
Because some of those digital approaches definitely could particularly benefit the organic industry, and maybe be able to provide better answers to treatment decisions if you develop and use some of those tools.
Yes. Well, that would be a great application. Now, I'm going to shift over to the Organic Transitions program, but just one that popped to mind in the last 30 seconds or so. We look for opportunities to document the ecosystem services, and particularly things like potential for mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions associated with organic production. Well, that's a perfect opportunity for modeling in that case. Now, it fits that program better than this one, but there will be just the same opportunities in this program that would lend themselves to modeling like what you just described. So I'd like to see it.
It also sounds like, based on the comments in the chat box, a few folks are agreeing that a tool that could be used to make those decisions at the farm level based on individual farm data, would be really useful for producers. Guy asks, who are the reviewers for grant proposals?
Oh, very good question. Subject matter experts is the trite answer, but what we do is craft the panel to reflect the pool of applications we get. So it with a program as broad as OREI, that's some of it's absolutely predictable from one year to the next, because you're going to need soil scientists, and you're going to need probably an animal scientist, whether it be in dairy production, poultry production, particularly. Not always need one on the swine side because we don't always get applications for organic swine production. But what we do is the process begins where we hire a panel manager, often from the land grant universities, but not necessarily. They can be from other research institutions like ARS. I don't know that we've ever had one that came across from industry, but we need somebody with a fair amount of stature, in this case within the organic research community, that has a network big enough to select panelists that can help us. So they become a temporary federal employee, and their charge, with some guidance from us, is to form this panel. We need a great amount of diversity in that panel, and I don't mean it in the sense of well, one small facet will certainly be race and gender, but what we really are talking about is diversity in geography. We need panelists from all regions. We need diversity in rank. We need new investigators, mid-career, late career. We need industry representatives. We need producers on the panel if we can get them, which is sometimes a challenge. We need, of course, but most of our panelists will come from the land grant system, from the organic research and extension community. And then, but they are selected also based on the expertise we need. So once we get the applications in, really the very day following the submission deadline, I typically go through and profile every one of the applications to define the subject matter expertise, the area of science that it involves, as well as the species that are involved, and then summarize that and pass that back to the panel manager so that they can make sure that we have the expertise we need represented on that panel, and that we don't have any that I would call redundant. So if it won't happen, so I'm going to use a ridiculous example, but for instance, if we had a year where no one submitted an application related to the dairy industry, well, then I don't need dairy scientists on the panel, and it would be sort of a waste of time and money to have them there. But at the same time, I will also guarantee you that we will have a few of what you might call outsiders on the panel, but not because of their subject matter expertise, but applied to any given grant. So they very much are a fit to the panel. But on a dairy application, I will absolutely have a dairy scientist assigned to it, but I also will likely have an economist assigned to it, or someone that may not be so embedded in that particular area of science that they lose sight of what's between, of things that are said and not said. So to get a thorough review, it's always nice to have that one person that's one step removed who can see some of the gaps that others might just skip over because they think they know what's being said. So that's the logic we apply to forming panels, and it has worked very, very well for us. And I think that's a lot of what drives the evolution of this program from the applicant standpoint. If you think about the pool of applications we got 10 years ago versus now, there's a world of difference, and they're far more science-based now than they were then. And a lot of it was just through the iterative process of the panel giving feedback regarding the scientific merit of these applications. And the community has responded in a brilliant fashion, and I appreciate that a lot. Does that help?
Guy just asked a follow-up. Does one panel cover all the applications?
One panel covers all the applications in a given cycle to OREI.
Okay.
So you'll assemble, depending on the number of applications you get, you might have a panel of, 22 or 23, maybe more, maybe less, that will provide their input. The applications themselves will generally be sent to 3 reviewers to provide written reviews prior to the panel meeting. And then the purpose of the panel meeting is to bring all of those together so that, well, the 3 that will provide written reviews, for them to discuss any areas where they agree and disagree, but then open it up to the entire panel for input so that by the time we get to the end of the panel meeting, the charge that they're given, and I'll say it pretty simply to them, is bring order to chaos. By the end of the panel meeting, I want all of our applications to be put in rank order according to scientific merit. That's what I want. Now, your mission, should you choose to accept it as a panelist, is to participate in that and see that we end the week with that as, not just as our goal, but as our end result. And that's what we do.
And Steve, if people are interested in participating in a panel, I heard you say that it could be, it's hard to get producers to sit on panels, which seems like a big opportunity because we would want to get that perspective from producers and make sure that we're, relevant to producers, especially, from an academic standpoint. So number one, how do we get more producers to be on panels? And number two, if we have participants today in our summit who might be interested in doing that, can they reach out to you and sort of, throw their name in the hat?
By all means, if you're interested in serving on a panel, send either Matt or me or both an email. And if you want our contact information, it's in the RFA. If you go to like the second to last page of the RFA, it gives both of our email addresses as well as that as our program specialist, Nirja Chiagi. And so any one of us can kind of get you into the cycle. Please do attach a CV if you have one to offer, and I appreciate that very much. And then what we will do with that response is forward it to our panel manager, who will then, if they need your area of expertise represented, could reach out to you in that regard. Now, why I think it's always so difficult to get producers is, yes, we offer a modest honorarium. It's kind of a thank you, but it certainly would not offset what many of the producers consider the opportunity cost of serving on a panel, because usually with the number of applications we get for OREI, it will dominate a week. Well, if you're at a land grant where your salary comes and they consider this as part of your service to the community, and you're not taking leave to do this, so the honorarium is in addition to what you might otherwise expect. That's brilliant. But if you've got a producer who is very busy, long days, 7 days a week, especially dairy producers, they look at you and say, I can't give you a week. And I say, I understand that, and I appreciate that. And I don't know that I've got a whole lot of ways around that, other than to the extent that a few have been able to break loose and be with us. I have been very grateful and very appreciative, because they do bring insight that we might not otherwise have. And the other thing that they'll toss back is an objection that I don't accept is, well, you look around the panel and most of these are PhD scientists. Well, I don't have that background. And I say, that's precisely why I want you on the panel, because yes, I don't need you to be a PhD. Of course, some of our producers do. Some of our producers are extraordinarily well educated, but the ones that have achieved education in other ways, they're educated about on-farm practices and what actually happens on the farm. That's experience. That's an education that I can't buy. So I would love to have them on the panel, because the more technical parts of this, the technical science, I have people on the panel that can handle. What I really need them for is to give us their perspective and help us evaluate, okay, this is a great idea, but does it apply to the industry? Does it mean anything to folks? Even if we were successful here, I'm excited about the, you know, the scientific information we might get, but is it going to help anybody anywhere? And that's where producers really keep us grounded if I can get them to serve on the panel.
That's wonderful. So we are right at the end of our time for our conversation with Steve, and we did have a couple of additional questions in the chat box. Hopefully people can feel free to reach right out to you, Steve, if they have specific questions.
Yep.
But
Send me an email. That's the easiest way. Phone calls get a little challenging because my availability is a little bit limited, but I'll always get back to an email. And if you need to talk by phone, send me an email and we'll set up a time.
There you go. Steve, we really appreciate your time this morning. Feel free to join us for the rest of our program today. Great conversation, everybody. Thanks for all the questions for Steve this morning.